All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the QT2 Roundtable. In this podcast series, we basically hit topics that are of interest to endurance athletes, and we tackle them from all different perspectives. Today, we have a topic of a lot of interest, I think, to people, which is on race fueling, whether it's for triathlon or running or a cycling event. These issues come up all the time, and so I'm really pleased to welcome our speakers today. We have Kylie McKenzie, who's a registered dietitian with the Core Diet. We have Dacey, who is a coach and athlete with QT2 Systems. And we have Jennie Hansen, who is also a coach and athlete with QT2 Systems and a very recently retired pro. So lots of good stories, great experience out there. So welcome, everyone.
All Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right, Kyle, I am going to start with you because when we kind of came up with this concept, we're like, let's tell the story from the perspective of someone who has gone through this, who has had problems with race fueling and then figured it out with the help of an RD and a coach supporting. So I just want to have you tell your story and talk about what went wrong and what ultimately prompted you to reach out to the Core Diet, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So when I started doing triathlon in 2016, I had no idea about like how big a deal, I guess, race fueling was going to be. I mean, I did marathons in the past and it's probably bad to say, cover your ears, Kylie, but I never had any gels or anything like that in a marathon. And then, going to the sport of triathlon, I'm like, okay, I'll just do the same thing as I've always done and not really kind of follow a plan or just kind of eat when I was hungry. And just kind of take, a couple gels here and there type thing. So it was not very organized. Once I started going up to the Ironman distance, I realized how important that was. My first Ironman was 2017, and I think I just had the vanilla goo gels every about 20 to 30 minutes on the bike and the run. I think I wanted to vomit vanilla goo gels by the end. But it got me by. I think it was just kind of like the beginner's luck type of thing for me. I ate a normal diet, but then in 2019 I became plant-based and vegan, so it kind of changed some things, changed what kind of gels or fueling I would, have during workouts. And then it started happening about 20, yeah, it was Lake Placid Ironman 2021. I was very unorganized with eating. I kind of ate when I wanted to, or like when I got hungry, and it was still like the goo vanilla gels that I would have. And 2 years in a row on the very same exact spot on the run in Ironman Lake Placid, I just became extremely dizzy, tingly lips, tingly fingers, very weak. Like I remember sitting on the side of the hill when you go down towards like River Road on one of the railings and just started, you know, vomiting, I guess, and it was nothing coming out. It was almost like dry heaving. And I was like coming in and out of conscious and everything like that. And um, I actually got to the med tent, not on my own, by two people kind of carrying me. And it was 2021, so the finish line was in a different spot. So I remember us being in the Lake Placid gym, and someone had just come up to me. She was, I don't know what position she was. She was a volunteer in the med tent, and she's like, "Oh, you're with QT2," because she saw my QT2 kit. And she's like, have you, tried the core diet or anything like that? Because she knew what was going on with me on the course and how like, I was having all these symptoms. And she goes, you should really, reach out to the core diet and really kind of see what was going on. So that was in July of 2021. And then in September, like I think it was August, I actually think I was now, I think I was actually coached by Jennie at the time, beginning in 2021. And I then reached out to Kylie and I said, hey, I think it's time to start getting into a plan, because especially being a plant-based athlete and, going through 2 years in a row of the same issue, I was like, okay, it's time to really hone in on this. And that's when I started with the core diet.
All right, thank you. So All right, so then Kylie, let's take it from here. What was the interaction then? Kyle reached out, and then where'd it go from there?
Yeah, so the first kind of step in the whole process is really just getting an understanding of our athletes and their background, right? The unique part about the core diet is we work in conjunction with the coaches. We work in conjunction as a team, really. It's a team approach. So really trying to understand what that dynamic is, what our athlete's background is, what Kyle's background is, what he's doing currently, and kind of going from there to kind of implement a plan. The biggest thing that I see is a lot of athletes are very gung-ho about the sport. They have all the gear, all the fun stuff that comes with endurance racing. But oftentimes nutrition is neglected, and it's really the missing piece. I like to say in the triathlon world, it's really the fourth leg of the race, but in reality, it's one of the most important pieces, especially once you get to half Ironman, full Ironman, ultra running distances. When those longer distances if you have more of a deficit in what you need, especially in a race setting, it's ultimately not going to set you up for success. So the initial interaction is really just having an understanding of what our athletes' baseline needs are. So Kyle came to me and, had some issues from past experiences racing, and using that to kind of help inform where we started, what we tweaked, to ultimately set him up for more of an individualized plan. Because the reality is having that individualized schedule, having that plan, is ultimately going to set you up for success, not only in a race setting, but in training as well, because it's really going to inform what we do day to day.
Okay, so I mean, if you're just out there listening to it, I mean, Goo says take one every whatever 30 to 45 minutes, and that should get you by. So what didn't work about that approach?
I think it was a start, right? Like he had heard of Goose. He, wasn't eating hot dogs in the middle of the race, right? So celebrating that success and like, hey, you recognize there is potentially some benefit to having some fuel in the context of a race setting, but kind of having some more structured goals around how often and what frequency, understanding how it fits into the plan for, what we're looking at on an hourly level. What's our goal? We have so many targets from a performance standpoint, pacing standpoint, heart rate. We do that day to day as endurance athletes. I'm an endurance athlete myself, right? Like I get it. But the nutrition piece, I think we need to structure it a little bit more. So, okay, Kyle, like what does that really look like for you based on your training volume this week? So having kind of more of a quantifiable target baseline, we need to be taking a minimum of 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour. So what does that mean, right? What does that look like? What does it look like on the bike? What does it look like when you're running? What does it look like in the pool, right? Because it might look very different, and there might be a different frequency or different product that might fit your needs in that context. But having that baseline understanding and then knowing like, okay, when we have a longer training session, that 30 to 60 grams per hour, that minimum threshold, it increases. It goes from 30 to 60 to 60 to 90 grams per hour, and kind of having an understanding of why that's so important to have that structure, I think is really where we start, and kind of informing really the main tweaks we have day to day in race fueling and also training as well, because it's not enough just to do it on race day.
Right. Well, yeah, for sure. So in your answer though, you talked about carbohydrates. What else needs to be considered when a fueling plan comes up? What else does your body need?
Well, we need fluid, which at baseline is water, right? We need to replenish the sweat losses in the context of our efforts, right? We are working hard. We're sweating. Sometimes we might be sweating even more than our normal baseline sweat, right? If we're used to training in a colder environment, and then we go down south to Florida. For me, I'm a Philly girl. It's chilly up here most of the time, right? So I went down last fall to Ironman Florida, and it was like a little shock to the system, and being a little bit warm, a little bit more humid. So knowing that sometimes our sweat rate varies too. So fluid is the most important thing, just in terms of a sweat balance standpoint. Electrolytes, because hydration is not just fluid intake, it's fluids and electrolytes, and those electrolytes actually help to optimize the water that we consume and optimize that absorption to actually hydrate us. Because just taking fluid, especially in the context of a race setting, is not enough. We need the electrolytes to help us retain that fluid and absorb that fluid. And the third piece is carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are the most preferred energy source of our muscles, actually our brain as well. But in the context of being an athlete and especially racing and training, we need a lot of carbohydrates. And so carbohydrates, fluids, and electrolytes are the key players in race setting. They're key players in training. They're really, and together, taken together, they're going to help with digestion, absorption, helping delay fatigue, right? Like extending your feeling of power and output on the race course, and also help minimize GI losses, right? And GI distress. And the harmful effects of dehydration, of like not taking in enough fluids or not taking in enough of the right fluids is really something I see pretty common.
Okay. So when you go to figure that out, so you've got Kyle and you say, okay, how do I know what he needs? There's like we do a sweat test, right? Can you talk about, maybe I can actually ask Jennie to talk about that. Like, what does a sweat test look like when you assign it to an athlete?
Yeah, so when I have an athlete that is starting to needs a fueling plan, there's well, thankfully QT2 is the nice like sweat test built out, but it just basically involves weighing in before and after an hour of race intensity. Usually I'll put it like the last hour of the long ride, and recording like fluid and food intake before, like during that hour, and then calculating the sweat loss based on that.
Okay, so that's calculated based on how much weight you lose, is that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And then also there's, like the follow-up questions for the RD, like, do you notice a lot of salt on your race kit after races, and just, getting into like normal caffeine usage and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And then, yeah, getting into the athlete's history too, of any issues they've had with race fueling in the past.
So then Kylie, you would take all of that and give a plan out, right? That says, here's what you need to drink, here's what you need to eat, swim, bike, run, and it's pretty
Exactly.
specific, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think the important thing with the sweat test too is that's just one moment in a training day, in a training week, right? And it's helpful information. It's data that we use to help inform kind of our baseline targets. But, with the caveat that we need to have a contingency plan for some of the extremes, right? So the plan that we outline, and we encourage, even when we do the sweat test, to try to replicate race conditions as much as possible, right? So we commonly recommend doing it in, indoors in a trainer where we actually can know the temperature, we can have a fan. So it's the sweat test that Jennie referenced, it's a very accessible way to assess your baseline sweat rate. And so we use that to really help allow for that individualized fluid ingestion strategy. And that is kind of the most important thing that a lot of athletes are lacking, is like, just using water, not using sports drink, using, having specific targets around the fluid intake is really kind of the first step, because how much fluid you're consuming, especially if it's sports drink, is not only going to help meet your fluid needs, it's going to also give you electrolytes and carbohydrates, which helps dictate the frequency that we need to consume solids, right? So, in other sports settings, like lesser, not endurance necessarily focused sports, there are some strategies around like drinking to thirst. But in the context of endurance sports that typically results in the underconsumption of sodium and other vital electrolytes. And so having our athletes on more of a schedule that's individualized to them, we know that looking at a lot of studies out there that kind of look at hydration, we know that finishers in ultra races, endurance events, they tend to consume fluid at a greater rate than non-finishers. So the important thing is what type of fluids are we consuming? So it's not enough just to consume water. Like I said, we need to think about the electrolytes. We need to think about the carbs as well, because overhydrating is also not great. So we want to kind of find a medium, healthy medium there of minimizing our dehydration losses. We don't want to go more than 1 to 2% of our body weight, because that alone is enough to impair performance. So we're not trying to necessarily max our sweat rate 1-to-1, but we're trying to minimize how excessive that dehydration is and kind of find a sweet spot there, right? Overhydration, especially if it's very dilute fluids, meaning it's lacking electrolytes, can have really serious health effects as well, and result in something called hyponatremia, which is when our serum sodium is low. And that's something that, unfortunately we see sometimes, and that's typically found when athletes don't have a fueling plan, most likely, is how I would like to guess. So the super extreme version of that, I see people in the hospital sometimes for more health associated causes of that, but it can result in a coma and death. So I think it's important to have an understanding of why we are promoting sports drink and why we're doing it based on your unique sweat rate, because it's not only going to help you perform better on race day, but it's also going to keep you safe. Right. And that's the goal. We're having fun. We want to be safe. We're doing this to live long, healthy, happy lives and enjoy things with our family, friends, coaches, teammates, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So one thing that you mentioned was the importance of practicing as we go into this, not just being like, okay, here's my plan and I'm going to do whatever I want during my workouts. And come race day, I'm just going to tackle this. And I think there's a few pieces of that, but Jennie, I want to turn to you for this first one, which is when you go and you look at people's downloads, you're seeing, let's say it's on the bike, you're seeing their power numbers, you're seeing their heart rate, you're seeing pacing, they describe how they feel. What are certain things that jump out at you that make you think, oh, I need to ask them about their fueling?
I think, the main thing is when you see the power fall off a cliff toward like in the back half of the ride, or just gradually decrease. When you see that like heart rate power decoupling where the heart rate's rising or staying the same, the power's like really dropping off. That indicates to me pretty strongly that there's a fueling issue going on, or even when both drop off, unless there's like some kind of fatigue at play, if there's nothing just underlying that should have explained it, then immediately my mind will go to like a nutrition issue, especially if it's a newer athlete that has like no experience in fueling whatsoever. So, that's kind of the main one I would look for. And then also just, when the athlete's telling me, oh, I just wasn't feeling good at the end, or when they are telling me that they actually had GI issues, or, if I'm looking at a file and there's like 0 breaks in a 5-hour ride, I'm like, okay, well, this person obviously didn't have to like get up and go to the bathroom at all. So they probably weren't like hydrating enough. It's like sometimes I get athletes that are like, oh, I had to take a break like 3 hours in to go to the bathroom. I'm like, no, that's a good thing. Like that's what you want to have to go to the bathroom like a couple times in your 5-hour ride. So, those are kind of some of the main points I would look for, is just, is this athlete able to sustain their effort throughout the course of the workout like they should be able to.
Yeah. And Kyle, so do you still take vanilla goo? I'm just
God, no,
The ultimate
not
question.
not even a chance. No.
It's fine not to say it's. I actually have a whole stack of my like vanilla goo in addition to other things.
Oh
but,
boy, are they expired?
No. But all right. So what did you do? I guess, what did you do differently? And how did you feel after? Like, what did you notice about changes in your performance based on changes in what you were putting into your body?
So first off, I went on Amazon and I bought some just like packets of like Tailwind and just loaded up on Gatorade Endurance, like those big jugs of with the powder. And I honestly just started taking it more seriously and you know, trusted my coach and said, all right, practice fueling during your rides. So like when we have, you know, a 20-degree snowy day out in Rochester and we got to stick to 5 hours indoors. Okay, well, what are you doing? You're practicing your hydration. And I think I remember a couple of times saying in my comments, like, you know, had to get off to, you know, take the dogs out, but then pee or whatever. So it's like, you know, I practiced that whole, you know, getting off the bike a couple times during a ride. And I remember, especially racing, when, you know, the plan that Kylie had was, you know, you should be peeing, you know, at least twice in an Ironman, you know, bike. And I remember after Ironman Lake Placid this past year, getting all excited because I'm like, oh, I peed twice on the bike. Like, I stopped to pee twice. I go, that means my hydration was good. You know, and so just practicing that over and over. And then also during my rides indoors is, you know, yeah, we had a plan of going like every 30 minutes having a power gel. So I would practice with that and then see kind of how I felt towards the end of like a ride. Was I having GI issues or was I maybe still like that decoupling happening? Maybe I needed to fuel more. And so that's what I started, you know, literally saving all my wrappers like from the power gels and just kind of writing things down on a pad of paper, like, okay, how much did I have this hour? How much did I have this hour? And Jennie could probably go back into some of my files and see like early on, like I literally listed things out, like what I had this hour, what I had that hour. And so it was good to kind of go back and see that. And now I actually have that on my phone so that when I start planning for like a 70.3 or an Ironman race, okay, these are the gels that I need, and this is the time frame of when I'm going to take these gels. And then I started programming my watch and my bike computer to go off at those certain times. So I don't have to really think about it as much. I have to just think about my eyes on the road and not crashing, but also, you know, still getting in my fuel. So I started practicing with that. I started practicing with different types of gels and like solids, just because like, you know, during race day when, you know, you're nervous, your gut can do certain things to you. And so I learned quickly after having all those vanilla goos that that's going to upset my stomach. So playing around with like a variety of different gels as well, to kind of see how that, you know, sets with my stomach. And, you know, as a former coach for cross country and track, back at the high school and college level, I always told my athletes, don't try something new race day or the night before a race. And so I still hold that true, is like, I'd rather have a terrible, you know, quality workout because I tried to get my race fueling, you know, together than to, you know, have a crappy race because of race fueling. And because I've had those in the past and I don't want to have them again. So I think practicing with those different gels, and I've come to it, I think Kylie mentioned about, you know, having the, you know, the minimum of like up to like 60, you know, grams of carbs per hour, I think you mentioned. And that was the one thing that's really stuck in my head too, is the minimum. Because once I started going longer, I realized, okay, I need to maybe consume more. So I started going like every 20 to 25 minutes of consuming a gel. And then that's when I started to feel better towards the end of the workout. So it's all about kind of just that's what we practice. Yeah, we practice our powers and our endurance, but we also practice the race fueling during workouts as well.
Mhm.
That's such a great point, Kyle, too, because much like we're training many, many hours, swim, bike, run, strength training, recovery, you name it, right? We need to train our gut as well. So yes, if someone's looking at kind of an outline on their race fueling plan for a full Ironman, it might be their first full Ironman, and they're looking at the frequency, all those gels or Cliff Blocks, whatever it is, and then all the Gatorade, like 12 bottles. Like, what do you mean 12 bottles, right? Like, we have to prep our gut to handle the load we're asking it to manage from a fluid, carbohydrate, and electrolyte standpoint, right? We need to train our gut. We need to maybe avoid certain foods. Like if you like incorporating some solids for variety, okay, let's work to kind of identify solids that are going to be appropriate to, minimize the negative effect of GI symptoms during a race, right? That food that you love and incorporate daily might be a great nutrient dense food, but in the context of a race, in the context of training, it's really probably not going to offer anything other than hurting your stomach, right? So having a discussion around that, I think far too many athletes overcomplicate it as well, right? Consuming multiple products at random intervals, especially in training, and then they fail to really replicate it on race day, or maybe the inverse, right? They don't do it at all in training, especially on long runs and rides. And then come race day, they're willy-nilly grabbing different things on course. They don't have any plan from a hydration standpoint. And you're probably going to have GI distress if you don't practice this regularly, right? So having an appreciation for training the gut. Well-trained athletes can tolerate higher carbohydrate intake, but we need to practice it, right? So in order to use that extra fuel we're giving our bodies, we need to train our body to handle it. And so I think that's really the important thing is the consistency piece. And you've clearly implemented a lot of changes in the 2+ years it's been since we initially did your plan. I think, especially even just changing from water to sports drink, right? Like the impact that has alone, I think is huge, from elevating your performance, elevating your training. And I think it's also important to understand that when you're consuming carbohydrates, sodium, water, whatever it is, that doesn't necessarily mean your muscles are receiving what you're consuming, right? So if a product isn't consumed properly or formulated properly, right? Like I've had several athletes who maybe have some trouble reading instructions on, the Gatorade Endurance in particular, or Tailwind, right? The label on how many scoops per X amount of ounces, right? So it's been an aha moment of like, I've only been putting 1 Gatorade Endurance scoop per 24 ounces of fluid. So like, you're way undershooting what we should be doing, right? So if it's not the right formulation, it could cause the bloating, it could cause a sloshy stomach, heartburn, belching, vomiting, gas, diarrhea, like all those GI symptoms that we want to avoid, which can result in dehydration, can result in, depleting the usage of the sugars you're giving your body for fuel source. So in order to really increase the capacity for you to handle what you're giving your body, we need to practice it consistently, and we need to do it pretty much daily in training, right? Simply eating or drinking whatever you want is fun and wild and maybe festive at times, but doesn't really guarantee that it's going to optimize performance on race day.
I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, most people do though, right? I mean,
Yep.
you make the mistakes, you realize that what you're doing doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to like pick up a little on what you said though, which is about, I mean, when we're sitting on the trainer, I laugh because I take my bottles, I fill them all up, I measure them, I put them on the table next to my bike. And as I go through, I'm like, okay, I finished. And I put the gels that I want and I time everything, and that's all great. Practice is fine. But then you show up on course and it's not so controlled. And also now recently, IRONMAN has changed the nutrition that's available on course from Gatorade Endurance to Mortal Hydration. And for the next month, a mix of regular Gatorade, right? So how do you, I mean, there's a couple layers in this. First of all, is how do you translate the perfect practice environment when you're training into the uncertainties that come with race day as the first piece. And then the second piece is how do we now transition over to make sure that we're getting what we need on race day when maybe what the fuel that's being offered on course isn't what we would want to be taking.
I think things are going to happen, right? Shit happens, right? Pardon my language, but it does happen. And so if you have a plan, if you understand your baseline needs, when something happens, you know how to get back on track, whether that's relying on the on-course nutrition, whether that's, maybe you've fallen behind on your fluid target for the last hour because it was a super technical and hilly part of the bike course. And your watch reminder, it reminds you like, hey, I need to get back on track. So having a plan, I think, makes those scenarios that are out of your control a little bit more manageable, right? You don't need to panic. You dial back to what you know, what you need. Get back to your fluids, get back to, whenever you can, get back on your routine of your gels. I think that can be helpful when stuff happens that's out of your control. People drop bottles, right? You might not. I had an athlete in Ironman Texas. He couldn't find his personal needs bag, which wasn't great. It wasn't ideal, but he pivoted and knew like, okay, like what can I do that's going to help me stay on track and get me across that finish line, right? I think sometimes as well, when it's in like a full setting, right, you are probably going to be sick of sports drink. You're probably going to be sick of gels and blocks at a certain point. And so kind of knowing the balance of like when to push through that and when to maybe dial back and say, hey, my target is around 90 grams of carbs per hour, but maybe I'm going to shift to that minimum threshold of 60 grams as close as I can versus pushing it. So kind of going to the lower end of that range and still getting something in, maybe dialing it back a little bit on your pace, your effort, right? Because we know that in the context of exercise in general, we're getting less blood flow to our GI tract. So there's that element. And then in a race setting, we're probably going even harder than we might in a typical training day. So our regular digestion absorption might be affected. So I think it's just important to try to stay on that plan as much as you can. And having a plan makes it a little bit more manageable when things go awry, because you can kind of orient yourself on like, okay, like let's dial it back to what the simple things we need: fluid, carbs, electrolytes, and let's stay on track as best we can. I think that really helps manage those uncontrollables. And then I think your second question was about the recent Ironman changes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, not great. So little backstory in terms of like sports drink. I love sports drink because it's an appropriate combination of fluid, carbohydrates, and electrolytes. Usually we want to stay as close to the composition of our blood because that's going to help with the absorption. And taking in too many carbohydrates per amount of volume of fluid is not necessarily going to be beneficial, because your body is going to want to bring more fluid to kind of dilute all those particles. So I think it's important to understand that, an ideal range for a sports drink should be 4 to 6% or 4 to 8% on the upper end carbohydrate. So, for a standard bottle, that's around 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrate per 24-ounce bottle. From an electrolyte standpoint, we generally look for 300 to 600 milligrams per bottle. And, the recent changes from Gatorade to Mortal, and it's not to say Gatorade is the be all end all, right? There's a lot of options out there, but I don't feel that Mortal is a well-formulated sports drink. Quite honestly, it's a sodium-rich beverage similar to Pedialyte or Element or whatever you can think of there. A lot of options out in the market now, but it doesn't offer carbohydrates in the same way to really kind of elevate it to a sports drink status. So it does contain electrolytes. It's very heavy in sodium, but it only has 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per bottle. So it's not a replacement to Gatorade. It is, quite honestly, not a sports drink, but it is better than plain water, right? It does offer some electrolytes. My other issue with it is it has stevia in it. And so if you are someone who is perhaps sensitive to sugar alcohols, it could cause some GI distress. So I think it's important to understand that the current offerings on course aren't necessarily the best in terms of sports drink offerings, but having an understanding of how we can kind of make up the difference, I think, is important. So it depends on the race. It depends on your unique fluid needs, right? Are you someone who can get by with 24 ounces of fluids per hour on the bike, or are you someone who needs 48 ounces of fluids per hour? And so I think your baseline needs, which we work together to kind of figure out, kind of helps inform what our backup plan is for kind of the future of races and kind of utilizing the on-course hydration and on-course food offerings as well. Historically, it's very hard to bring all of your own fluids. So I think, you know, there is a future where we're going to have to utilize the on-course mortal to some extent, but, you know, perhaps a mix of starting with your own fluids with a sports drink that's formulated appropriately, and then, you know, switching to mortal until you can get to your personal needs, and perhaps mixing your fresh batch of proper sports drink and maybe tweaking your frequency of your solids just to kind of make up the difference on the carb front. What I do not love is a hyper concentrated bottle. And the main reason why I don't prefer that is because of that notion of kind of flooding your GI tract with a lot of carbohydrates. And if it's too osmolar, if it's too concentrated, it's going to affect absorption and digestion. So I don't love that route, but I think it's been a unique problem that a lot of my sports RD friends, we've been brainstorming around, and I think it's going to take some time to kind of figure out what makes sense, but ultimately it's going to come down to each unique athlete and what works for them based on their needs. And I think it all comes back to, you know, knowing what your baseline needs are and practicing it consistently so that, you know, race day, we have a plan in place, especially given the changes, because Gatorade's been on course for so many years. I can't even think back to when we didn't have Gatorade, right? Because it's been so long. So change is inevitable, but we'll work together to figure out a plan. And I'm confident that we'll get through this hump, and you know, people will still be killing it out there, even with a little bit more strategy and around kind of how we're going to meet our needs. So.
Right. So if you are someone who has been using Gatorade normally on the course, Gatorade Endurance on the course, and you just start taking mortal, I mean, that's not good enough, right? I mean, you have to supplement in some way. You're going to need more carbohydrate intake from solids or somewhere.
Definitely. So like the way that I kind of look at it on a math quantifiable standpoint, right, is one bottle of Gatorade Endurance is around 45 grams of carbohydrate. And so let's say we compare that to our standard mortal hydration, which only has 8 to 10 grams. Let's make it easy. Let's say 10 grams. So there's a 35 gram deficit per bottle just to make it 1-to-1, right? So that's going to increase the amount of solids we're going to need, most likely. It's going to require we make up the balance on the carb front, because we need those carbs. That's our fuel source, right? We don't want to take away those carbs. So we are going to still be doing a great job on the fluid standpoint, but we need those carbohydrates. And in particular, we need multiple transportable carbohydrates to really maximize the, you know, carb oxidation, which is going to directly result in increased output. So, you know, I think it's a unique challenge, but not something that, you know, is impossible to come up with a solution for. I think, you know, trying to lean into what your baseline needs are and then kind of adjusting from that is sort of a good starting point. And if you're someone who's already been practicing with Gatorade or Tailwind or Scratch, another, you know, approved sports drink that kind of fits the bill for what we're looking for on a carb and electrolyte standpoint, I would say continue doing that. I wouldn't suggest switching to Mortal for the reasons I've outlined before. It's not a sports drink. It's an electrolyte drink. So having an understanding of that, I think is very important. It's not a one-to-one substitution. And we're going to get through it. I know we're going to get through it.
with knowledge. I mean, that's what I was saying before we started, that one thing we always say is that we are in total control of our race fueling, but you have to know what you're supposed to do. So knowing your baseline, I think that's really great advice. Knowing your baseline, knowing what's in the products that we're taking, and knowing how to fill in when it's not perfect, when we don't have our table next to us on the trainer, So I want to switch gears a little and go to you, Jennie, on this, which is that, okay, we've got it all. We know exactly we haven't lost any of our fuel. We have all the stuff we need, but then something happens. I mean, right, on race day, my first second triathlon I ever did, I had a flask that was filled with gel. First bump I hit, it was gone. I'm like, now what? And I was like, oh, wait, I have a few more shoved into my shorts. So it kind of got me until I could pick stuff up on the course. So it didn't, but I'm like, my plan was gone. So on the fly, Jennie, or things like you drop fueling, the race starts late. You get a flat on the bike. If you're down for 20 minutes that you weren't expecting, or half an hour, that impacts your fueling, right? So how do you give us some examples of things you've been through and how you've sort of responded?
I think it's always Cozumel. When the year I crashed in Cozumel, I think that I sheared the bento box off my bike and it flew off. And in retrospect, I should have just stopped and picked up all my race fueling that was in there, but I didn't. And so I lost all my gels, all my bars, an hour and a half into the race. And then I'm like, okay, well, I have more in special needs. I have I had mixed bottles of Gatorade Endurance because there's regular Gatorade on the course. And I just, kept on with my Gatorade Endurance until I got to special needs, and they had lost my bag because the numbers there were different, and it had rained that morning and my number was completely washed off. So I had nothing but the salt I had taped onto my bike. And then I knew there was regular Gatorade on course. So I think it's important just as an athlete to be able to think logically about how can I get as close as I possibly can to my needs based on what's available to me. And so it was just, I had my salt, I had the Gatorade on the course. That's just what I took in the entire bike ride. And then when I got on the run, I was a little depleted, but I just was like, okay, I'm just gonna take in fuel, take my first few gels every 25 minutes instead of every 35 to 40 minutes, and just, get myself back on track there. So I think it's important to just arm athletes with the knowledge of, here's how you can think logically if something happens, because something will happen eventually at some point. So, it just need to be able to think about what's available to me. In retrospect, now I always myself and recommend just definitely have some kind of backup gels on you. Have that oh crap gel on your person. And I think too, some athletes will get super stressed if they're following their plan and they don't and they get a little bit of GI issues, or if there's one little thing that goes off. But I think it's important to remember that in an Ironman, at some point something's going to feel a little bit off, and just just be able to read your body's signals in terms of maybe I need to just stretch out for a little bit and slow down, bring the heart rate down, bring the gut back under control, and just know how to troubleshoot. I think it's kind of what when Kylie was saying, at some point the nutrition plan will get off, and just kind of be able to read the signs of your body and have that knowledge.
So it can be corrected. I mean, that's
yes.
My stomach. Oh my God, my stomach's killing me.
Yeah. I mean, even in this past year in Cozumel too, I flatted and was on the side of the road for 40 minutes in the direct baking sunlight, and and there was the swim was canceled. So I was standing there for an hour in the direct sunlight with no fluid and no fuel until they brought us back to transition. But that obviously none of those are ideal, but that's just one of those situations where you have to say, okay, as soon as I can get to fuel and hydration, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, even if you are just sitting at the side of the road, you still need to take in your fueling. It's not like that time disappeared, right? So
Oh,
you
yeah,
have to
yeah,
come up
yeah.
for it
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. I mean, I think I've had a couple instances where I've had mechanicals where I've been gotten behind for a while. And I think, and then there was one year in Placid where it was freezing and I wasn't drinking that much. And like, I was just trying to survive going down this descent in pouring rain when it's freezing. And I didn't eat anything and I didn't think about it. And I just like got to the run and I was so depleted. And, I made the mistake there of, I didn't account for the fact that my body was probably burning through more just to trying to warm myself up in that situation. So, that was a lesson learned there too, that, when you're in these like cold temperatures where you're not drinking as much and you're trying to stay warm, you need to be aware of that you need to be fueling more and eating more too to make up for it.
Mhm. Yeah. So I want to circle back to where we started, and Kyle, come back to you. Got your race fueling plan. You practiced it a lot. You had a pretty great race at the end of the last season, right? At Lake Placid last year, right? So, all right, let's hear the success. We heard the DNF and the numbless side of the road. Let's hear the
Yep.
other side of it.
So, I knew I had redemption. One is like, I love Lake Placid. I love the Ironman there. So it was kind of like, an excitement opportunity is like, okay, I'm in my home state, I'm doing whatever. And I'm like, you know what, I really need to hone in on this. This is going to be something. And, I literally stuck to the exact plan, all the way up to the run. I even got to that mile 15 of the run and where I've had issues in the past, and I had enough energy to pretty much say, F you. And I just like kind of kept on going. And I literally, I had the power gels when I was supposed to. I had the Cliff Blocks when I was supposed to. I had my Heather Jackson bananas in both hands, when I was supposed to. And even taking the time, just like what Jennie was just talking about, okay, I need to, calm down a little bit. I think I was on River Road on the last turn or the last lap, and I just had to, I felt like I was starting to get depleted a little bit. And so it was that trigger to be like, okay, slow down a little bit, get what I need to get in. Do I need to get in, another Cliff Block or another power gel just to kind of get me by? And that's exactly what I did. So I went a little above the plan just because, I listened to my body. But I had, it's an Ironman, you're going to feel depleted, but I had enough energy in me to like be excited about the finish line and get there in one piece, get there strong. Feeling like I could have maybe run another couple miles. And so just following that plan was just like so huge, and like, you got to believe it because you did it. So yeah, I don't know, it was probably the best moment I've had in my, I don't know, 10 years, almost 10 years of doing triathlon now. And I think, Jennie, I think Kylie, I think everyone at QT2 and Core Diet, because the plan works. And it just takes, that practice. And if you keep doing the practice, on your trainer at home or going out for your run afterwards, I personally like to bring my own like hydration like bottle with me, just because during an Ironman, I'm probably gonna wear it anyway, just to have my own, Tailwind or Gatorade in there. But also I stick all my nutrition in the little pocket there too. So I practice with that all the time. And I know Jennie's told me to, like, anything above like 20-minute run, you should have that on you. And I've been doing that and it really helps.
Yeah, that's good. That's when I see athletes and they're like, okay, and you watch like, okay, I'm looking at your heart rate, I'm looking at what's going on. All of a sudden things are slowing down. What's going on? Oh, well, it was only an hour and a half, so I didn't think I needed anything. I'm like, no, 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 no. You
Yep,
need.
yep.
I see more people like it's happened to me too. It's like you'll have like a 35-minute run off the bike and people will be like, I don't need to fuel this. And then things just get weird. Like 20 minutes in without fail. It's something about that like short run off the bike that everyone always thinks, I don't need to fuel that. I'm like, no, you need to have something like right at the start of
Yeah.
that run. 'Cause
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, we think about all the hours that we spend training and focusing on so many details, and it can all just completely fall apart if we don't do the nutrition piece. And so thank you to Kylie and the rest of the RDs at the Core Diet for putting together plans that work. And one of the things I really like is that you don't just say, okay, this is the product you need. It's okay, well, what do you like to use too? And make sure it's something that, it works. I don't know if you've ever written plans with fig Newtons and salt potatoes. It's like, I just
Absolutely.
like to eat
Yep,
them.
yep.
So,
I don't think Kylie worked with him, but I had an athlete last year that like that was what he was fueling with, like fig Newtons and water, and whoever he worked with and got him to like fig Newtons and Gatorade, but that was what he liked. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you put a lot in, so just to be able to make it work and for,
Yeah.
so. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is a really fun way to spend the last 45 minutes and hear everything. And it's awesome to see that changes can be made and, just trying to understand what our body needs and doing the best we can to give it to it. So really appreciate you all participating today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Reem. And
Thank
everyone,
you.
Kyle and Kylie.
Thank you all. Great job, Kyle. On to the
Oh,
next
yes.
one, right, baby?
Oh yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Ironman Lake Placid 2024. Here we go.
Love it.
Yep.